So number one, Toronto. Biggest city in Canada, full of opportunities, full of jobs, huge film industry, tech industry, and it's basically Canada's New York City. In fact, did you guys see that thing recently where an American said something like downtown Canada is trying to be like Times Square in New York? And you know, people are kind of making fun of her for calling Toronto downtown Canada. But it is true that some people in Toronto think they live in downtown Canada. There's kind of this thing where it's like Toronto against the world. People from other cities can sometimes make fun of Toronto, but the reality is it's our biggest city. There's a lot going on there, and if you get the chance, it's definitely worth a visit. Also definitely worth a visit is Canada's second biggest city, Montreal, aka Montreal. And Montreal is the city that I'm in right now. It's a beautiful city, largest French-speaking city in Canada, but don't let that scare you, especially if you're a tourist. You can definitely get by speaking only in English. And yeah, what else to say? I mean, Montreal has old Montreal where you have those cobblestone streets and the history, and it's just a city that like is so full of culture everywhere you go. It's been described as a very European city, and I think that's true. It's a city with a lot of graffiti and street art, a lot of artists in general in Montreal. And it's just one of those cities where you got to be here to understand what it's like. It's a very unique place in Canada, and I'd highly recommend you to check out Montreal. Now, another very unique place in Canada is number 3, Vancouver. Where do you even start with Vancouver? Well, okay, you know when you see those pictures of Canada and you know, you see the nature and you see the ocean and you see the mountains, a lot of those pictures are coming from Vancouver. It's definitely, I would say it's definitely Canada's most scenic major city. And if you're into nature and you want to be connected to nature, it's a great place to go. It's also becoming a hyper modern city. There's a lot of new skyscrapers, a lot of glass buildings, and yeah, it's just a special spot. So if you're on the West Coast and you're into nature, don't miss Vancouver. Okay, so number 4 is Calgary. Okay, so Calgary's in Alberta, which is often compared to Texas in the United States, in that it's the heart of Canada's oil industry. You sometimes see people wearing cowboy hats in Calgary, but I would also say it's a city that's quickly changing. You know, the oil industry is going through a rough period of time, and Calgary's going through a bit of an identity crisis because so much of its money and so much of its culture was tied to the oil industry. But now it's evolving. I went there last year, and I think it's a city that's changing in a lot of ways. There's a huge, awesome new library that they just built downtown. There's museums. There's more things outside of the oil industry than someone might expect. It's also close to nature as well. It's only about an hour away from the Rocky Mountains, where you got cities like Banff, and you can go skiing and snowboarding. So yeah, I think Calgary's going through a bit of a transition period, but it's really an interesting city, and you should check it out. So the 5th biggest city in Canada is Edmonton, and Edmonton's not getting a spot on this list. It's kind of unfair to Edmonton because it is a cool city. There's some things going on. I mean, you know, there's the West Edmonton Mall. There's a big mall in Edmonton. But in terms of variety on this list, I just think it's too similar to Calgary. People from Edmonton are going to hate me for saying that. It's kind of unfair to Edmonton. But your hockey team got 3 number 1 picks in 5 years, and you still couldn't make playoffs. So that's also unfair, isn't it, Edmonton? I just lost all my subscribers from Edmonton. Okay, number 6, Ottawa-Gatineau, 6th biggest city in Canada. So it's listed as Ottawa-Gatineau because Ottawa is on one side of the river and Gatineau, the French-speaking part of the city, is on another side. But Gatineau is, you know, most people just call it Ottawa. And Ottawa is the capital of Canada. And yeah, it's very deserving of a spot on this list. Not only because it is the capital and it's got the Parliament buildings, a great visit for any tourist to Canada, but it's also got a very historic downtown. It's got the Rideau Canal that you can go skating on in the winter time. Then again, Ottawa's been described as a bit of a boring city in that it doesn't have as much nightlife as, you know, Toronto or Montreal. But You're only a couple hours away from Montreal, so you can always drive here, I guess. But the point is, Ottawa is a government city. There's a lot of government jobs. And for that reason, you got a different kind of culture versus, Vancouver or Montreal. Next up is Winnipeg. Winnipeg is a city that a lot of people probably wouldn't put on this list. A city people like to make fun of. But hey, I grew up in Winnipeg, and I can tell you there's a lot going on that people don't know about. And I think it's well deserving of a spot. Winnipeg was once described as Chicago of the North because about 100 years ago, it was like one of the booming cities in North America. So we have a lot of cool old architecture, especially in an area called the Exchange District. We have a lot of Indigenous history. It's a city that the First Nations of Canada were settled there something like 5,000 years ago. So if you want to know some of the early history of Canada, it's a great place to visit. Generally, I just think the prairies of Canada are a bit underrated. People travel east or they travel west, but they forget about the middle a little bit. But I would say if you get the chance, definitely check out Winnipeg. The next largest city in Canada is Quebec, la ville de Québec, capital of the province of Quebec, the French part of Canada. I would say Quebec is well deserving of a spot on this list, if just for the history and the culture. I've actually never been to Quebec, I'm ashamed to say. I gotta get down there because it's not too far away. Quebec is often described as the most North American city in Canada. Sorry, the most European city in Canada. How could you be a North American city in North America? Okay, it's the most European city in Canada, arguably in all of North America, is what I was trying to say. I mean, look at these streets. It has that old world charm that people don't usually associate with Canada. But if you're looking for that, there's lots of it in Quebec. Now, just taking another look at the Wikipedia article, after Quebec, we have Hamilton, Kitchener, and London. None of those are making it on my list. Sorry to say, but those are all like Greater Toronto Area, GTA, basically in the huge area that I would consider to be Toronto. But coming up next is Victoria, and I'm definitely putting Victoria on this list. I mean, when I was young, I thought Victoria was just a city that people went to retire in because it's on a place called Vancouver Island, not to be confused with Vancouver the city. Vancouver Island is on the far west coast of Canada, and it's this place where people go because the weather is mild and it's kind of connected to nature. But I didn't think there was much going on until I recently visited Victoria, and I saw that construction is booming. There's a lot of young people moving there, a lot of great breweries. Victoria is quickly changing. If you're looking for a city that has the same connection to nature as Vancouver, but you want a smaller place, a little bit more chill and laid back, Victoria is a great place to visit or live. Also a great place to visit or live is Halifax, number 9 on my list. We're jumping from the west coast all the way to the east coast. Halifax is famous for having great lobster. It's also famous for having great donair. Now, what I will say about Halifax is it's in the part of Canada known as the Maritimes. One thing, if you're thinking of living there, traditionally there aren't as many jobs. Like, it used to be an area that relied heavily on fishing industry, and I don't know if there's as many high-tech jobs. If you're okay with a slightly quieter way of life, I think Halifax is a great place to look at. And of course, it's a beautiful city if you want to visit as well. And just like that, we're at number 10. What's it gonna be? After Halifax, we have Oshawa, and then Windsor, then Saskatoon, St. Catharines, Regina, St. John's, Kelowna. Okay, so one of these cities is gonna get the last spot on my list. And sorry to say, it's not gonna be Oshawa or Windsor. Oshawa, same problem as the other ones. It's basically Greater Toronto Area, so Windsor is a bit different. It's kind of like Canada's Detroit. There used to be a lot of auto industry jobs there. I don't think Windsor is interesting enough to get on this list. Sorry to anyone from Windsor, but you know. Saskatoon and Regina, 2 prairie cities, much like Winnipeg, but since I grew up in Winnipeg, I can't ethically put a city from Saskatchewan on my list because, yeah, you know. No, we have a bit of a rivalry, Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. But like, to be honest, I've been to Saskatoon a couple times. It's a great city, but it's the same problem as Edmonton and Calgary. They're too similar. So if you only had time to visit one, I'd say you definitely have more things to do in Winnipeg. St. Catharines, Niagara, pretty cool if you want to visit Niagara Falls, but other than that natural attraction, I don't know if the city itself is worth being on the list. Which leaves me with St. John's, Newfoundland and Kelowna. And now I'm very tempted to give this to Kelowna because I used to live in Kelowna. I went to school out there. It's in a place called the Okanagan Valley. It's scenic, it's beautiful, the summers are great. But you know what? I already have 2 cities from British Columbia on this list. I feel like we need some variety to show what Canada's all about. So I'm gonna give it to Newfoundland, St. John's. It's a city that has these beautiful Scandinavian style architecture. Again, you're connected to another side of nature. You know, I've never actually been to Newfoundland, so I can't tell you too much about it. But just looking at the pictures, it looks amazing. I met a couple people from Newfoundland. They have very thick Canadian accents, but they're great people. And they're part of what makes this country what it is. So St. John's, Newfoundland gets spot number 10. Honourable mentions go to Kelowna, Saskatoon. If you wanted to go see the Northern Lights, you could go to Yellowknife or Churchill. There's also smaller towns like Banff and Whistler that get a lot of tourism.